A minor sovereign in early 17th century Europe, Alaric rules a kingdom that survives less through strength than through positioning. Valen sits along contested trade arteries, a narrow corridor between empires that view it as a convenience rather than a threat. Its survival depends on appearing useful, never formidable. Alaric embodies this perception. At court, he is measured, soft-spoken, almost forgettable in presence. Foreign envoys describe him as agreeable. His own nobles interpret this restraint as weakness, mistaking stillness for incapacity. This misreading is not accidental. Alaric allows it to persist, even encourages it. A king underestimated is a king unobserved. He governs through omission, rarely asserting authority in visible ways. Decrees are minimal, interventions subtle. Decisions seem to emerge from consensus, though the direction of that consensus rarely deviates from his long-term design. Psychological scar. As a child, Alaric witnessed the systematic erasure of his mother, Queen Isolde. She was accused of treason through a narrative constructed by the noble council. No evidence, only coordinated testimony and repetition. Her disgrace unfolded publicly, carefully staged to ensure legitimacy. Afterwards, her presence was removed with precision. Portraits taken down, records altered, her name avoided in speech. The lesson embedded itself early. Truth, he learned, is not a matter of fact, only of endurance. What remains written, repeated, and uncontested becomes reality. His grief did not manifest as rebellion. It reorganized into observation. He began to study not events, but how events were shaped, who controlled their retelling, and why certain lies survived while others collapsed. Unique intellectual talent. Alaric possesses an unusual capacity for memory, not merely recall but structural retention. He tracks patterns in behavior across years, mapping alliances, betrayals, financial dependencies, and emotional vulnerabilities. Conversations are stored with context, expressions are linked to intent. He does not interpret immediately. He accumulates. This makes him slow to act, though not indecisive. Each decision is delayed until variables align. He studies how individuals respond under pressure, how they justify themselves, and how they can be guided toward predictable conclusions. His strength lies not in forcing outcomes, but in arranging conditions where outcomes become inevitable. Moral code. Alaric operates within a rigid internal framework. Never act in anger. Emotion distorts timing. Never oppose power directly. Resistance invites consolidation. Instead, alter the environment in which power functions. Ensure that every punishment appears self-generated. The target must believe they authored their own fall, or at least cannot prove otherwise. This code is not ethical in a conventional sense. It is functional, designed to minimize risk and maximize permanence. Internal state. Externally, Alaric is composed, even courteous. Internally, he is distant, detached from immediate emotion. He does not suppress feeling. He defers it indefinitely. His smile, often noted by courtiers, is controlled and deliberate. It signals reassurance while revealing nothing. Over time, this detachment becomes identity. He is less a participant in his own court and more its observer. An architect studying a structure, he intends to reshape without appearing to touch it. Core betrayal. Alaric's ascension in 1615 is staged as continuity rather than transition. The court presents stability, banners raised, oaths renewed, ceremonies executed with procedural precision. The noble council stands in perfect formation, each member performing loyalty with practiced ease. Their words are correct, their gestures measured, no opposition is visible. Yet within weeks, Alaric recognizes the architecture beneath the display. Authority does not reside in the crown, it circulates through the council. Treasury flows are managed by hereditary stewards aligned with council interests. Military commissions are assigned through patronage networks older than his reign. Legal decrees pass through advisory chambers that function less as council and more as filtration systems. The king signs, others decide. The realization sharpens when Alaric requests access to restricted state archives, a privilege denied to previous monarchs under the justification of preservation protocols. This time, the council complies too quickly. The archive is presented as a gesture of trust, though its curation feels deliberate. Documents are arranged not for discovery, but for interpretation. Among them, Alaric finds records concerning Queen Isolde. Not accusations, those he already knows, but financial correspondences, coded exchanges, and ledgers disguised within diplomatic reports. Patterns emerge, funds diverted through intermediary merchants. Trade imbalances that benefit external states while weakening Valen's internal economy. Signatures that appear repeatedly across unrelated transactions, all tied to council members or their proxies. His mother had not been destroyed for treason. She had approached proximity to exposure. The The accusation against her had been preemptive, a narrative constructed to neutralize risk before it materialized. Her removal was not reaction. It was containment. More disturbing than the conspiracy itself is its durability. The network did not dissolve after her fall, it expanded. The same families retained influence. The same channels persisted, refined over time to avoid detection. The archive does not reveal a past crime, it outlines an ongoing system. Psychological wound, this discovery does not produce immediate anger, it produces clarity. Alaric understands that his position is ceremonial not by accident, but by design. His lineage, presented as continuity of sovereign authority, is in practice a stabilizing symbol, useful for maintaining order while decisions occur elsewhere. His mother's erasure was not an isolated act of cruelty. It was a structural necessity within a system that cannot tolerate unsanctioned truth. The implication extends inward. His identity as king is not inherited power, but curated illusion. Every gesture of respect he receives is filtered through the same apparatus that erased her. Every document he signs reinforces a structure that once eliminated a queen without resistance. The humiliation is precise, it is not public, yet it is absolute. He has been preserved, educated, elevated, only to occupy a role defined by limitation. His silence has been assumed, his compliance anticipated. Unlike grief, which demands expression, this realization compresses. It stabilizes into a fixed point within his perception. He does not seek to confront the council immediately. Direct exposure would fail. The system that protected them before remains intact. Evidence without control of narrative becomes irrelevant. The deeper wound lies in understanding that reality itself within Valen is conditional. Records can be altered. Testimony can be aligned, memory can be redirected. Truth is not erased, it is overwritten. Objective formed, Alaric's response is not directed at individuals. Removing a single council member would change nothing. Replacement would follow, drawn from the same networks, bound by the same incentives. The objective shifts toward structure. The system that allows truth to be reshaped must be dismantled, or at minimum, rendered unstable. This requires more than exposure. It requires reconfiguration of how information, authority, and consequence interact. He defines 3 principles for action. Information must become decentralized, resistant to singular control. Authority must appear to shift gradually, avoiding defensive consolidation. Consequences must emerge internally, so the system begins to fracture under its own logic. The goal is not immediate victory, it is irreversible change. Alaric does not declare this objective, he does not confide it. The court continues to see the same restrained monarch engaged in routine governance. His behavior remains consistent with expectation. Internally, the parameters of conflict have been established. The enemy is not a council, it is a method of control that has persisted across decades. Alaric initiates his response with precision and restraint. Rather than confronting the council, he begins altering the periphery of its influence, areas considered too minor to attract defensive attention. First, he promotes lesser officials into positions adjacent to decision-making processes. These individuals are selected not for loyalty to him personally, but for absence of entrenched ties to noble families. Clerks, regional administrators, and junior magistrates are elevated into roles that require oversight of records, correspondence, and minor fiscal management. Their advancement is justified publicly as efficiency reforms. Second, he introduces financial audits framed as modernization efforts. The language is neutral, standardization, accountability, alignment with emerging trade practices. External auditors are invited under the pretense of improving Valen's economic credibility with neighboring states. These audits do not directly accuse, they observe, catalog, and compare. Third, he begins to manipulate information flow within the council itself. Selective disclosures, partial data, ambiguous reports, and carefully timed updates are distributed unevenly. Each council member receives a slightly different version of events, encouraging misinterpretation. Minor inconsistencies grow into suspicion. Rivalries that existed beneath formal unity begin to surface. The design is gradual fragmentation. If the council can be induced to distrust itself, cohesion weakens. Without cohesion, coordinated narrative control becomes difficult. Without narrative control, exposure becomes possible. Early indicators: at first, the strategy produces measurable effects. Disagreements emerge in council deliberations. Financial discrepancies are quietly questioned. Certain members begin to act defensively, attempting to secure their positions through alliances outside traditional channels. Alaric observes without interference. The system appears to respond as predicted, structural resistance. However, the council adapts faster than anticipated. Their experience in managing internal threats allows them to identify patterns within the disruption. They do not react publicly. Instead, they reestablish alignment through private negotiation, redistributing risk among themselves. The promoted officials, lacking deep protection, become points of pressure. Some are discredited through minor scandals, others are reassigned. A few withdraw voluntarily, recognizing the instability surrounding their positions. The financial audits initially tolerated are gradually constrained. Access is limited. External auditors encounter bureaucratic delays. Reports are reframed before reaching broader circulation. Most critically, the Council begins to unify against an implicit source of disturbance. They do not accuse Alaric directly. Instead, they reinforce procedures that reduce his indirect influence, tightening approval processes, centralizing communication channels, and reasserting traditional hierarchies under the guise of stability. Failure defined. The strategy fails not through collapse but through absorption. The system does not break, it incorporates the disruption and adjusts. Alaric's approach relied on the assumption that internal rivalry would outweigh collective preservation. This proves incorrect. When faced with systemic threat, the Council prioritizes continuity over individual advantage. The fragmentation he sought becomes temporary noise rather than lasting division. The structure remains intact. Consequence: Alaric gains insight rather than victory. The Council's greatest strength is not individual cunning, but coordinated self-preservation. They can tolerate internal distrust as long as external control is maintained. This realization forces a recalibration. Subtle pressure at the margins is insufficient. The system cannot be weakened gradually from within without triggering adaptive defenses. Future action will require a different vector, one that does not present itself as reform and cannot be contained through procedural adjustment. Alaric's initial response avoids spectacle. He does not confront the Council in open court, nor does he attempt to invalidate their authority through decree. Instead, he begins at the edges, areas considered too administrative to warrant resistance. His premise is simple: systems fracture more reliably through internal imbalance than external force. The first adjustment is personnel. Minor offices, clerks, provincial assessors, junior magistrates are quietly reassigned or elevated. These are positions that rarely attract attention, yet form the connective tissue of governance. Alaric selects individuals whose advancement derives from competence rather than lineage. They possess no inherited loyalties to the dominant houses, which makes them structurally neutral. Publicly, the promotions are justified as efficiency reforms. Privately, they serve as observational nodes within the machinery of the state. The second adjustment concerns finance. Alaric introduces a sequence of audits framed as modernization. The language is deliberately unthreatening: standardization, improved record-keeping, alignment with expanding trade practices. External auditors are invited, their presence legitimized through diplomatic necessity. These reviews do not accuse, they compare, reconcile, and catalog. The intention is not immediate exposure, but the creation of a parallel record, one that cannot be easily rewritten once established across multiple points. The third adjustment targets information flow. Alaric begins distributing selective disclosures within the Council: partial ledgers, incomplete correspondence, and reports that differ subtly depending on the recipient. Each member receives a version calibrated to provoke doubt without revealing manipulation. The expectation is that inconsistencies will generate suspicion, and suspicion will erode cohesion. Rivalries that previously existed beneath formal unity are encouraged to surface. The design is incremental. No single action is sufficient to trigger defensive consolidation. Together, they are intended to produce friction within the Council's internal alignment. If unity weakens, coordinated control over narrative weakens. If narrative control weakens, concealed structures become visible. For a brief period, the indicators align with his projections. Council meetings extend longer than usual. Minor disputes emerge regarding fiscal interpretation. Certain members begin to act preemptively, securing their own positions through private assurances. The surface of stability shows faint stress lines. Alaric does not intervene further. He allows the system to respond to itself. The countermove: the Council's response is measured, neither immediate nor visible. They do not confront the king, nor do they openly resist his reforms. Instead, they adapt by redefining the scale at which they operate. First, they permit losses. Several minor figures, those recently elevated or insufficiently protected, are exposed to scrutiny. Small irregularities are discovered, their reputations dismantled through controlled disclosure. These individuals are removed with minimal resistance. The effect is twofold. It satisfies the appearance of accountability while redirecting attention away from more entrenched actors. The system appears responsive, even self-correcting. Second, they compress authority. Decision-making shifts from the broader council into a narrower inner circle composed of the most reliable members. This consolidation is justified as a response to administrative inefficiency introduced by recent reforms. Communication channels tighten. Information that once circulated among many now passes through fewer hands, reducing the risk of internal contradiction. Third, they reframe the narrative. Subtle rumors begin to circulate regarding Alaric's judgment. His reforms are described not as strategic, but erratic changes without clear necessity, disruptions to established order. These suggestions are never formalized. They exist in conversation and implication in the tone of reports. Foreign envoys note inconsistency. Domestic officials grow cautious. The image of a stable, passive monarch begins to shift toward one of unpredictability. The council does not need to prove instability. They only need to introduce doubt. Within a system where perception governs legitimacy, doubt is sufficient to constrain authority. Simultaneously, the audits are contained. Access becomes conditional. External auditors encounter delays framed as procedural safeguards. Reports are reviewed before circulation, their language adjusted to remove ambiguity. What cannot be suppressed is diluted. What cannot be diluted is isolated. The result is not confrontation, but absorption. The disruptions introduced by Alaric are incorporated into the system's existing logic and redirected. Hidden betrayal within Alaric's immediate circle, the failure develops more quietly. Lady Hélène, his closest advisor, has remained consistently present, interpreting court signals, filtering correspondence, advising restraint where necessary. Her proximity grants her access not only to his actions, but to his intentions. Hélène does not oppose him openly. She continues to serve with precision, her counsel measured and seemingly aligned with his objectives. However, she has reached a separate conclusion. From her perspective, the council's structure is too entrenched to dismantle without triggering catastrophic retaliation. Survival, not transformation, appears to her as the only viable strategy. Her communication with the council is cautious and indirect. She does not reveal plans in full. Instead, she provides fragments, timelines, areas of focus, shifts in administrative emphasis. Enough to allow the council to anticipate pressure points, not enough to expose herself directly. In return, she secures assurance. Her position will remain intact regardless of the king's trajectory. Her motive is not loyalty to the council. It is calculation. She believes that aligning partially with both sides maximizes her probability of survival. In doing so, she becomes a conduit through which Alaric's controlled unpredictability becomes predictable. The realization does not arrive as a singular revelation. It accumulates through inconsistencies that resist coincidence. Measures that should have remained obscure are countered too precisely. Individuals positioned as neutral observers are neutralized with disproportionate accuracy. The timing of the council's adjustments aligns too closely with decisions that were never formally disclosed. Alaric reviews patterns rather than events. The conclusion forms gradually. His strategy has not fragmented the system, it has refined it. By introducing pressure at the periphery, he has identified and eliminated the system's weaker components. The council has responded by consolidating authority among its most resilient members. Information flows have become more restricted, not less. Internal trust, though strained, has been recalibrated around a shared perception of external threat, him. More critically, the integrity of his own circle has been compromised. The point of leakage is not structural but personal. Trust, once assumed as an operational necessity, is revealed as a vulnerability. The failure is structural. The system adapts faster than it destabilizes. Each attempt to induce organic fracture has provided the council with data about its own weaknesses, about the king's methods, about where to reinforce. The immediate effect is isolation. Alaric's visible actions are now interpreted through suspicion. Any further reform risks confirmation of the instability narrative already in circulation. His authority, already limited, becomes conditional upon maintaining the appearance of restraint. Monitoring intensifies, communications are observed more closely, appointments require additional validation. The margins within which he can operate without detection narrow significantly. Direct confrontation is no longer viable. Indirect pressure has proven insufficient. The space between action and consequence has collapsed. Alaric does not abandon his objective. He redefines the parameters under which it can be pursued. Future moves must originate outside the visible structure of the court, beyond the council's immediate capacity to absorb or reinterpret. For the first time since his ascension, the balance shifts decisively against him. The system he intended to dismantle has adapted, strengthened, and turned its attention inward, toward the one variable it has not yet fully controlled. The next phase will require a method that does not resemble reform, cannot be contained through procedure, and does not depend on trust within a compromised environment. Alaric does not repeat the era of visible reform. The court, with its polished floors and echoing corridors, remains unchanged in appearance. Candles burn steadily along stone walls, their light reflecting across faces trained to conceal intention. Yet beneath this stillness, he alters the nature of conflict itself. He stops attempting to correct the system. Instead, he begins to distort perception within it. External threats are introduced first, not through proclamation, but through suggestion. Reports arrive from border regions describing irregular troop movements. Merchant convoys speak of seizures, of tariffs imposed without notice. Letters intercepted at ports contain references to alliances forming beyond Valen's sight. None of these fragments are entirely false. Each contains a degree of truth, adjusted in scale and timing. Alaric ensures these reports do not align. One council member receives intelligence suggesting an imminent invasion from the east. Another is warned of economic sabotage from southern trade partners. A third is given evidence of internal dissent among Valen's own provinces. Each version appears credible in isolation. Together, they cannot coexist. The council begins to question its own coherence. Meetings grow tense. Voices remain controlled, yet the cadence shifts, slight pauses, interruptions where none existed before. Glances linger longer than necessary. Words are measured not only for meaning, but for implication. The architecture of trust begins to thin. Alaric watches without expression. He authorizes emergency protocols quietly, citing the need for preparedness. These measures grant him limited authority over communication channels, allowing messages to be redirected, delayed, or subtly altered. Orders arrive late, responses contradict previous directives. Confusion does not erupt. It accumulates, paranoia is not imposed, it is cultivated. Each council member begins to suspect that another is withholding information. Private alliances form, dissolve, and reform within days. Conversations that once occurred openly are relocated to shadowed corners, behind closed doors, beneath the hum of guarded voices. The system does not break, it tightens, constricting itself. Alaric's internal monologue remains precise. They trusted structure. Now they must trust interpretation. Interpretation cannot be shared. A regional conflict, long contained between neighboring states, escalates unexpectedly. Borders shift, armies mobilize. What was once distant becomes immediate. Messengers arrive covered in dust, their accounts fragmented by urgency. Smoke is reported along trade routes, supply lines falter. Valen cannot remain peripheral. The council responds with efficiency sharpened by experience. Wartime authority consolidates rapidly. Decisions that once required deliberation are executed without delay. Military appointments are reassigned. Treasury allocations are redirected toward defense. The language of governance shifts from negotiation to command. For a brief period, the council regains clarity. The external threat provides a singular narrative, survival. Internal suspicion is suppressed in favor of coordination. The fractures Alaric engineered do not disappear, though they are temporarily overridden. Unity returns not as trust, but as necessity. Alaric recognizes the shift immediately. War simplifies systems. It reduces variables, aligns incentives, and centralizes power. The very chaos he attempted to construct internally now exists externally, though in a form that strengthens his adversaries. He does not oppose the war effort. He cannot. To do so would confirm the instability already attributed to him. Instead, he observes how quickly the council reasserts dominance when given a legitimate crisis. They do not fear disorder, he notes internally. They require it provided they define its boundaries. Alaric's personal world contracts further. Prince Cedric, his younger brother, had remained the last unaltered connection to a time before calculation. Cedric's presence within the court was uncomplicated, direct, occasionally careless, unaligned with the subtlety that defined Valen's politics. He represented continuity not of power, but of memory. His removal is executed through diplomacy. A political marriage is arranged with a rival house, framed as an alliance necessary for wartime stability. The ceremony is conducted with restrained formality. Tapestries line the great hall. Musicians play compositions that echo against high ceilings, their tones distant, almost hollow. Cedric does not resist. He understands the necessity, though not its depth. Their final conversation occurs in a private chamber, lit by a single window through which late afternoon light filters in muted tones. Dust moves slowly in the air between them. "You could refuse," Cedric says, though without conviction. Alaric studies him briefly, Refusal is visible, he replies. This is not. Cedric nods, accepting a logic he does not fully share. When he departs, the absence is immediate. The corridors feel longer. The court, already distant, becomes entirely impersonal. What remained of Alaric's emotional anchor dissolves without ceremony. Attachment creates leverage, he reflects later. Leverage invites removal. The second twist, the deeper realization forms as fragments converge. Reports from the war reveal inconsistencies, timelines that do not align, decisions made before information could have reasonably arrived. Certain council members appear unusually prepared for escalation, their contingencies already in place. Financial movements preceding the conflict suggest anticipation rather than reaction. Alaric reconstructs the sequence. The war, though not entirely fabricated, was influenced. Conditions were encouraged, tensions amplified, alliances nudged toward instability. The council did not create the conflict, though they recognized its utility and accelerated its emergence. War provided them what his reforms had threatened to remove: uncontested authority. Simultaneously, the pattern of internal leakage resolves. Lady Helene's role extends beyond opportunistic betrayal. Her proximity, her consistency, her access, none of it accidental. Records, when examined against older correspondence, indicate her placement within the court years earlier, her rise facilitated through channels connected indirectly to the council. She was not converted, she was installed. The implication is precise. His most trusted advisor was never outside the system he sought to dismantle. Collapse of Plan Alaric's second strategy fails at a structural level. He attempted to destabilize perception within a system designed to operate under uncertainty. The council, conditioned by decades of managing competing narratives, does not fracture under confusion. It adapts. When chaos exceeds manageable thresholds, it reverts to consolidation mechanisms, war, hierarchy, command. The environment he created does not weaken them, it prepares them. His internal assessment shifts. Disorder is not their weakness, it is their instrument. Transformation afterwards, Alaric withdraws. Publicly, his presence diminishes. He attends necessary ceremonies, signs decrees presented to him, speaks rarely. His demeanor returns to its earlier interpretation, calm, passive, disengaged. The narrative of instability fades, replaced by one of quiet compliance. Privately, the withdrawal is not retreat, it is reconstruction. He abandons the identity of reformer, even of ruler. The concept of kingship, as previously understood, becomes irrelevant. Authority exercised visibly is authority that can be constrained. He begins to think not in terms of governance, but of systems. Patterns replace positions, dependencies replace titles. The court becomes a model rather than a domain. He studies how authority persists without recognition, how structures fail when their assumptions are removed. They believe power exists because it is acknowledged, he considers. Remove acknowledgement and structure collapses without resistance. The architect replaces the king. Final strategy unfolds without announcement, without visible deviation from routine. Over months, Alaric introduces minor legal adjustments, technical clarifications, procedural refinements, revisions to administrative language. Each decree appears insignificant, often buried within broader documents. Collectively, they alter the pathways through which authority is exercised. Chains of command are rerouted. Certain approvals, once centralized, are delegated outward under specific conditions. Financial authorizations are tied to criteria that seem practical, though they create dependencies on newly defined processes. Treasury flows are redirected subtly, encouraging reliance on credit instruments managed through intermediaries rather than direct control. Noble houses, accustomed to stable access, begin to depend on these evolving mechanisms without recognizing the shift. Simultaneously, communication protocols are adjusted, redundancies are removed in the name of efficiency. Channels converge, narrowing points of transmission. Nothing appears unstable until the moment it does. On a single night, aligned with no observable trigger, the system ceases to function cohesively. Messages fail to reach intended recipients. Financial transfers stall, their authorization pathways unresolved. Military commands encounter conflicting validation requirements, delaying execution. No component collapses independently, the failure is synchronized. The council responds with expectation of control. Orders are issued with confidence shaped by decades of authority. They are not followed. Provincial officials, uncertain which directives hold legitimacy, delay action. Military units await confirmation that does not arrive. Financial agents refuse disbursement without clarity that cannot be obtained. Authority, once assumed, becomes questioned simultaneously across all levels. The council cannot identify a single point of failure. Each attempt to reassert control encounters structural absence, pathways that once existed no longer align. Their power, dependent on recognition and compliance, dissipates without confrontation. Alaric does not intervene directly. He observes. They were never obeyed by force, his internal voice notes. They were obeyed by agreement. Remove agreement and command becomes noise. Lady Helene approaches him once the pattern becomes undeniable. Her composure remains intact, though the precision of her speech carries a different cadence, calculated, adaptive. You anticipated this, she states. Alaric does not confirm. She offers alignment, repositioning herself as an asset rather than observer. The system she trusted has failed. Survival requires adjustment. He grants her continuation within the court. Her new position carries title without influence. She retains proximity, though without access to decision-making structures. She observes as she once did, though without the capacity to affect outcome. Her survival is intact, her relevance is not. The council does not fall through violence. No arrests are made, no executions ordered. Their authority dissolves as recognition withdraws. Without functional control over communication, finance, or command, their positions become ceremonial, mirroring what Alaric once embodied. They are not removed, they become unnecessary. Alaric's final reflection remains consistent. Power persists only while it is believed to exist. Valen stabilizes gradually. Centralized authority, now restructured, operates through simplified channels. Decisions are executed with reduced interference. External threats diminish as internal coherence becomes visible to neighboring states. Trade resumes along predictable routes. Military organization regains clarity. The system is rebuilt, leaner, quieter, more controlled. Alaric achieves his objective. The structure that once rewrote truth has been dismantled and replaced. Control over narrative, over authority, over consequence. These now reside where he intended. Yet the cost remains embedded. He governs without opposition, though also without intimacy. The court functions efficiently, though without trust. Stability is present, though it is maintained through design rather than belief. His final internal assessment is measured. The system cannot erase truth if it no longer fears it. It only needs to control it. The victory is complete. It is also hollow.